Before the news, we were telling you about government maintaining its decision that the 82 Venezuelans who were deported on Saturday wanted to go back home. And I did say that we will be speaking a little more about that. And with us is human rights activist Mr. Ignacio Ruben-Smith to share his thoughts on the latest developments as it relates to what's happening between these asylum seekers and Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and good morning to your viewers and your listeners. Well, it has been issued by a lot of the international organizations that they have expressed their concerns. Amnesty International has expressed concerns. The UN has also expressed their concerns. And you have to ask yourself, why would they have expressed concerns? Obviously, because Trinidad and Tobago is a signatory of the 1951 Convention and also signatory of the 1967 Protocol. Ratifying is another issue. The ratification of those two international agreements is something else. However, we are signatories. So I would say that there's somewhat of a moral obligation. It's not that the country is, or the government is obliged to follow the rules, but there is somewhat of a moral obligation to seek out on the issues of refugees and asylum seekers. And I'm going to come back to the Cartagena Declaration. The Cartagena Declaration was a declaration that was signed in 1984 by 10 Latin American countries. And why the Cartagena Declaration comes into play? Well, simply because in the 80s, late 70s, mid 80s, you had a conflict zone in Central America. You had Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, Nicaragua, all in conflict. And there was a Venezuelan initiative called the Contadora Group, which sought to find peace in the region. And this is why the Cartagena Declaration comes into play, so that these country people from Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador will find refuge in other Latin American countries, such as Mexico, Venezuela, Colombia. Now, for Venezuelans, and I'm going to be very accurate in my figures, because there is a complete misconception of how many Venezuelans or how Venezuelans are leaving the country. Well, these are the facts. Venezuela has had a brain drain of 4.3 million people between the ages of 19 and 20 to the ages of, say, 55. That's 4.3 million people. Now, if 4.3 million people came across the Trinidad and Tobago, what will that do to the economy of this country? And I can give you the, most of the diaspora population, the Venezuelan diaspora, is located in countries such as the United States, which is housing close to about 1 million. Then you have Spain, Portugal, and Italy, which is housing another close to about another 1 million. And then you have countries like Peru, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, and Ecuador, which are housing the balance of that diaspora that has left the country. Now, when you look at the numbers from Miss Charmaine Gandhi Andrews, the head of the Immigration Division, you would notice that in 2016, we had approximately 39,200 visits that came through regular port entries. That number dropped to 16,000 in 2017. Now, why did it drop to 16,000? Well, very simple, because it's prohibited to fly to Trinidad as a Venezuelan. The cost of the plane ticket from Maiquetía to Piarco return is close to $800. Now, if you live in a country where minimum wage in the black market, if you had to trade your bolivars in the black market, is $2, how long is it going to take you to save to buy a ticket for $800? It's going to take you forever. So what a lot of Venezuelans have seek to do is that they walk across countries like Colombia and Brazil. So what we have had as an influx of Venezuelans in Trinidad has been essentially those who have ties to Trinidad. And I say very strong ties because although we in Venezuela never conducted a census of Trinidadians or Trimbagonians, I can assure you that the Trimbagonian diaspora in Venezuela over the last 80 years has grown from a couple of thousand, say 10, 15,000 to probably about 100. It could be very well in the hundreds of thousands. And those that have seeked to come to Trinidad, most of them are dual nationals. They have their Venezuelan passport and they have applied for their Trinidad and Tobago passport.
The decrease in number of visitors through the regular and legal ports of entry from 39,200 to 16,200 to 16,000, sorry.
And change.
Yeah. So you talk about that the decrease is because probably the cost of the tickets, but there is the view that while they may not be coming through the legal ports of entry, they are coming through the illegal entry.
Oh, they're not reporting themselves to immigration. Yes. Because and again, I come back to knowing concepts. A human being cannot be deemed or demonized as an illegal. It's an administrative procedure. You either have an immigration status or you don't. So in my case, I am a permanent resident. Those who come and report to immigration and have their passport stamped will be either entering as visitors or as tourists. And if the time elapses, then they have no immigration status. That doesn't mean that they are illegal. Because like, again, there's this, an illegal immigrant. The human rights, the Human Rights Convention allows you, it tells you that you have the right to go to any part of the world. So you have the right to migrate to any land in the world. So to actually call someone illegal is not the correct term. It is somewhat of a misconception, meaning, okay, you don't have an immigration status. And that's an administrative procedure. It is not, call it a felony or a crime.
But I want to get onto the issue of Trinidad and Tobago Trinidad and Tobago sending back these Venezuelan nationals to the country that they say that they wanted to get out of, and they didn't get the assistance that they thought they would have gotten from Trinidad. What does that say?
Well, you need to understand something, and this has to be analyzed case by case. Why were these Venezuelans held? Is it because they had a stamp that was not accepted by the immigration authorities? Was it because they overstayed their time? Is it because they were caught working without a work permit? So again, there are many, every case, every individual would have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. However, if you are in a detention center and it is totally outside of your comfort zone, and you have been there and you have basically been struggling to survive, to keep yourself alive, and you are offered the opportunity to leave the detention center, what will you do?
It was the opportunity to lead. So you're saying then that they didn't have the option of staying here, but rather to just go back
no,
to their
I didn't say that. I said, if you are in certain conditions, you're moved out of your comfort zone, and you're placed in the conditions that you would consider harsh, because for some people, it's a different perspective. So again, if you are what you would consider harsh conditions, and you were offered the possibility of removing yourself from those hard conditions, then you would take whatever choice you have to, say, improve your way of life.
Okay. So what do you want to see happen with Trinidad and Tobago and these Venezuelans who would be coming across to the country?
Quite frankly, I don't think that many Venezuelans will try to come across to Trinidad. There's a reason for that. Number one, immigration laws in Trinidad and Tobago are very strict.
Mm-hmm.
And the word has already gotten out that if you overstay, you could end up in jail. If you work without a permit, you could end up in jail. So if that happens, and this is the image that immigrants are going to face when they come to Trinidad, then...
But there are a lot of Venezuelan nationals in Trinidad as it is.
Most of them are dual nationals.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. My family. My family has been here since 1820.
Yeah, but that's just one family.
That's one family, okay. And, but what about that migratory wave that went from 1930 all the way to 1979?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of Trinidadians went across to Venezuela to work on the oil fields, because Venezuelans had a very huge handicap. They couldn't speak English. And some Trinidadians had the possibility of acting as translators in a broken Spanish, but they worked as translators between the Americans and the Venezuelans. That is how my grandfather went across.
So I'm not saying that this is not the case, but you know, the number of Venezuelans, you actually see more Venezuelan nationals around the country, even.
Mm-hmm.
And
I wouldn't doubt that.
People are raising the concern that, you know, they're coming there. I heard yesterday from Minister of National Security Gary Griffith saying that, you know, if we allow them to come over too much and we set a precedent by granting that refugee status, it can lead to an increased crime rate, higher unemployment, increase in prostitution, and that is some of the concerns that people are concerned. That is some of the problems that people are having, not with these. Crime and unemployment and prostitution and those things, that okay. is what is bothering some people.
Yes, but you need to understand the Venezuelan way of thinking. Venezuelans are not migrants by nature.
Mm-hmm.
They're not migrants. They'd rather stay and suffer in their own country than go elsewhere. What you are actually seeing is probably an extreme situation. And it is kind of heartbreaking, because when you live in a country, and I'll put it to you this way, can you even picture 13,000% inflation? 13,000%. This is what the projected inflation for Venezuela is going to be for 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, you have a national security issue in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, what do you do? Because trying to find a solution is not going to be easy. The solution is not one that is going to just come out of a hat. And this is why the governments of Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago have to work together. They have to find, push for an education program so that Venezuelans who are seeking a way out of Venezuela will probably say, okay, if I don't have ties to Trinidad and Tobago, then probably that is not my best option. If I can go elsewhere, then where I will have refugee status, such as a country like Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Chile, Peru, then those are my options. I can tell you, I have a niece. She's currently going to graduate school, and she had an option to go to the U.S. because her mother is a U.S. resident, but she chose to go to Argentina. Mm-hmm. I have my two brothers, my two older brothers, they both live in Germany. So the coming back to all of there has to be governments need to work together. It's not about having open borders or trying to close your borders, because that is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah. Mr. Ignacio Rubin Smith, human rights activist, I would like to thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts about what is taking place, and hopefully both governments do meet and discuss some of the possibilities, Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. This has been another edition of Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago. We continue with the discussions after the break. Stay with us.